Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here, and today I'm going to talk about a subject that is constantly being talked about in the basketball world, and that is the GOAT conversation. So I really haven't weighed in on the GOAT conversation on this channel before, and I don't really plan to formally weigh in on it in this video. If you don't know a little bit of background, the GOAT refers to the greatest of all time in reference to the best player in NBA history. So if you're not familiar, usually most people or a lot of people would answer Michael Jordan, but now there are consistent populaces of people that would pick either LeBron James or Kareem or Bill Russell or Michael Jordan. So I'd say that those are the main four getting discussion here. You've got Jordan probably in the lead in the discussion, then LeBron second, probably Kareem third, and Bill Russell fourth. And today I'm basically going to break down in this video why I think it is very difficult to determine a unanimous greatest player of all time in NBA history, just based on some of the ways that people argue in favor or against certain players. So now the first thing that seems to always get brought up in this discussion is success, or more specifically, championships. And so now, what does that mean? It basically just means the number of championships that people win, or if you're talking about just success in general, people sometimes talk about like playoff success, like getting far in the playoffs, or even regular season success sometimes. But mostly, this part of the conversation, as far as success, refers to championships won. So to go, I'm basically only going to talk about these four players in Jordan, LeBron, Kareem, and Bill Russell because I think these are really the four guys. Maybe you could argue Magic Johnson too, but I think these four guys are the main four that people discuss in this conversation. So first off, Jordan has six attempts in the finals, which is pretty dang good. Bill Russell, of course, is the all-time leader with 11 rings. Kareem has six, like Jordan, but I think he lost. I know he lost three times with the Lakers, and then I think he lost once with the Bucks as well. So he's 6-4 in the finals. And then LeBron has won three times, and he's lost six times in the finals. So of the four guys in the conversation, you'd say Bill Russell looks the best. Then Jordan and Kareem each have six, and then you've got LeBron with only three, but he has gone to the finals nine times. So the first problem with this discussion is that if you want to point to based on this statistic, you might say Bill Russell is the greatest of all time. But then a second point that often gets brought up in the GOAT conversation is the competition that you played. So some people would argue that certain eras in the NBA are more difficult to play in than others or more competitive than others. So the argument against Bill Russell's 11 championships was that when he was winning many of those, there were only 8 teams in the NBA. So let's say that you had the number of like 2 teams, you had nearly half the NBA on lock at that point. So really, if there was like a really good team, sometimes teams just with certain matchups have advantages. So like even if you watch the NBA as of today, you'd say the Philadelphia 76ers and Celtics are both two really good teams, but it seems like every time the two of them play, the Celtics always have the number of the 76ers in the same way. If you look like in the basketball in the 90s, if you look at historic matchups between like Hakeem's Rockets and like Charles Barkley's Suns, you'd see consistently that the Rockets were always beating the Suns in the playoffs and regular season in the 90s. In the same way, the Suns would oftentimes beat the Sonics. And it just sometimes certain teams in a matchup have an advantage. But the point is, in the 60s, the Celtics seemed to have the advantage against the Lakers, who were really the only other notable team at the time. And so, like, because they were better than that one team, they were basically better than the whole league, so they didn't really have to face many teams. So that's a big detraction from the Bill Russell argument for MVP in that he really didn't have that much competition. So as for I think Jordan and LeBron, their competition arguments are pretty similar in that they faced a lot of tough teams in the playoffs and in the finals. You had LeBron going up against possibly, or actually, the greatest regular season team of all time in the Warriors, one of the great modern dynasties we've ever seen in the Warriors. He also went up against a really good Spurs team in the finals twice, and then the Oklahoma City team that was on the rise, which is pretty good. And then you had Jordan go up against some great teams like the 64 win Sonics were a notable one, the 64 win Jazz, um, 62 win Suns in 1993, and then the Lakers and the Trailblazers were also good when he faced them. So you had him face some really good competition as well. And then Kareem is kind of the weird one because he has like a finals in 1971 and then a finals as late as 1989. Um, so he's kind of in the mix there, but people detract a little bit from his argument based on him um, not being like the primary option on some of those championship teams, and then also um, the 70s was a little lighter for competition as well, as far as not as many teams in the league before the NBA ABA merger. So sometimes people point to that as a weakness or a chink in his armor as far as his argument for the GOAT conversation. So if you look at that, like who had the most competition, you might be pointing to LeBron or Jordan. Um, yeah, they both. I would say that they probably both had the toughest competition. But then another thing that gets brought up in the argument is longevity. And when you look at longevity, you probably say that the order as far as longevity probably goes Kareem as the best for that, then LeBron, then Jordan and Bill Russell kind of tied. They both, well, I'd say Jordan had about like a 12-year prime, and then he had the like 12 seasons where he was playing in his prime. And then you had Russell, who basically had about a 12-year prime too, even though he played about 15 years. He basically had a 12-year prime. So I would put those two right there. And then LeBron, you'd maybe say has had like a 14-year prime from about 2004 or 5 to 2018. That's what I would say is like LeBron's prime, which is insanely long. But and then Kareem's, you'd say about 1969 to about 1984. So that's about 15 years. So he's definitely in first place as far as years in his prime. Overall career longevity, it basically goes in the same order. Bill Russell and Michael Jordan both playing about 15 years. LeBron is currently in his 16th year, and then Kareem played from 69 to 89, so 20 years. Um, so yeah, that's the order for that as far as longevity. Another big thing that gets brought up is competition. Excuse me, we already talked about competition. I was going to say supporting cast as far as teammates. So you had Bill Russell, who basically played with the most stacked team ever, even if you take him away. They had probably like four of the six best players of the 60s. Basically, um, you might say best raw talent in the 60s, Wilt Chamberlain, but then next you probably have like maybe Oscar Robertson, and then like Bill Russell and Jerry West are tied for the 3 spot. And then after that, if you look at like Bob Cousy, Sam Jones, those are probably the two next best players of the 60s, and those are both on the Celtics. And then you have Havlicek, who's also on the Celtics. So you have probably like the 5, 6, and 7 players of the 60s. Maybe Elgin Baylor's in there too, probably up pretty close to the top. But like if you look at the top 10 players, Bill Russell's Celtics probably had 5 of them. And so in that case, that takes away a little bit from his argument where you say, you had almost an all-star starting lineup. So how much work did you really have to do compared to some other guys in your era? And was it easier for you to win titles because you had a more stacked team? So that actually works against Bill Russell. It seems kind of weird, but it does, in that some people think that he doesn't really deserve as much praise because he didn't earn his championships as much, because with a really good team you don't have to do as much of the work. So that's that argument. And then as far as Kareem, some people would say the same sort of thing, where like, you play with the best point guard of all time, and you probably would have only maybe won like 2 championships if not for him. It's a really weird argument, actually, now that I think about it, that people would detract from a player based on who they played with, which they don't really have any control over, but it somehow um, plays into it somehow. But yeah, so a lot of people point to that for Kareem and say, you only have 2 Finals MVPs and 6 championships, so clearly on a lot of the teams where you were winning titles, you weren't even the best player. So that's something that people point to for Kareem to take away from him. So as far as Jordan, Pippen was a top 50 player of all time. Rodman was a two-time Defensive Player of the Year. B.J. Armstrong and Horace Grant were all-stars in their prime when they played with him in the early 90s. They both made the All-Star team in '94, a season after Jordan left, but their stats were actually the same as the season before. If you really go back and look, there's really no distinction. They maybe were kind of undeserving All-Stars, but All-Stars nonetheless. Um, Tony Kukoc was Sixth Man of the Year, so he had some pretty good help there. So going and then next you have LeBron, who's had some pretty good teammates from Wade and Bosh in Miami to Kevin Love and Kyrie Irving in Cleveland. And I think this one is sort of a. I think Bill Russell probably gets the worst in that he had the best crew around him for the tenure of his career, but and then Kareem probably gets a lot of the negative about this too, in that um, he had the greatest point guard of all time on his team for a lot of his career. But I think that this is a weird argument in that, like, for anyone you try and tear down in this argument, you could equally tear down somebody else. Like, somebody says, well, LeBron had Wade and Bosh, or Kareem had Magic his whole career, but then somebody else could come back and say, well, Jordan had Pippen, who's like a top 50 player of all time, and then he also had a two-time Defensive Player of the Year in Rodman. And so it's kind of like, oh, well, uh, or you can just keep going back and forth with it. Well, um, Bill Russell didn't work as hard as anybody else. He had Hondo and Bob Cousy and Sam Jones. Well, I mean, LeBron had Wade and Bosh. It's not like he didn't have any help. So I don't really like that argument in any scenario, because no championship team becomes a championship team without having multiple really good players on their team and everybody playing to the best of their abilities. Like, it's just a bad point to make in any debate regarding who's the best player of all time, because I don't think there's ever been a team where a guy has basically been the only person playing well. It's not like you can win a championship where one guy plays amazing and 14 guys play bad. That just doesn't happen. So the last 2 points I'm going to talk about are statistics and then accolades. So as far as statistics, Kareem is first on the all-time scoring list. I believe, let's see here, Karl Malone is second, Kobe is third, Jordan is fourth, and LeBron is fifth. So LeBron will probably get up to around third or second, I think, by the end of his career. But of course, he did play longer than uh, Jordan already, so that's a weird one. And then Bill Russell's nowhere near this as far as like stats. He's probably the worst off because he only averaged like 15 points a game for his career. So basically, Jordan's career line is about 36 and 5, I think, if I remember correctly, as far as 30 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. And then if you look at LeBron's career numbers, it's 27, 7, and 7. So 27 points, 7 rebounds, 7 assists. And then I think Kareem is somewhere around 28, 11 or 12 rebounds a game and like 4 assists and maybe like 2 blocks a game. So that's pretty good. Um, Stats is a weird one too, in that, like, I don't know how big of a difference is averaging 28 points a game compared to 30, like between Kareem and Michael. Or it's just hard to, and like when people say like the all-time scoring list, like, well, that's just basically the longevity argument. So you can't really include that in the stats argument because that's the longevity argument. So don't bring up the all-time scoring list. Um, as far as as far as stats, I think it's between the three guys of Kareem, LeBron, and Jordan. It's pretty hard to nitpick. Um, like, you have to basically be like, oh well, 30's higher than 27, so Jordan's better than LeBron. I think that's a very incomplete argument to make. Um, as far as blocks and steals, like, yes, those are factors too, but not huge in the all-time greatest player argument. As far as shooting numbers, I think Kareem is somewhere in there at like 53, 54% from the field for his career. Jordan's at like 48 or 49. I think he's at 49, and LeBron's at like 52, and then I think Russell's somewhere in there at like 55. So all pretty efficient players, especially considering that Jordan shot a lot of mid-rangers. That's pretty good to shoot 49% from the field, and then the rest shot good from the field as well. And then the last argument, which probably is one of the biggest ones for people, is accolades. So this includes like all-star appearances, all NBA teams, and then you've got MVPs and Finals MVPs. Those are probably the two of the bigger ones. So I'll go through each of them quick. Jordan probably looks the best on this one. 6 MVPs, 6 Finals MVPs, I believe a 15-time All-Star or 14-time All-Star, because in the season where he only played half the year, he wasn't elected. Um, as far as all NBA team, I think he was elected 12 times. Neither of the seasons in Washington was he, but the other 12 he was to the first team, I believe. Um, as far as Kareem, he's a 19-time All-Star. I'm not sure on his All-NBA first teams. I think it's like 10 or 12 or something like that. Um, he's won 6 MVPs and 2 Finals MVPs. As far as Bill Russell, I think he's won 4 MVPs, and then I don't think they had the All NBA teams back when he was playing, but he has 11 championships, and then they didn't really introduce Finals MVP till later on in his career, so that's kind of a moot point with him. And then for LeBron, you've got 4 MVPs, and then you've got excuse me, I said Jordan had 6 regular season MVPs. He only had 5, because I remember Kareem had 6, Jordan had 5, LeBron had 4. But so okay, yeah, Jordan only had 5, but he had 6 Finals MVPs, which is definitely the most of any of these guys. So LeBron's had 3 Finals MVPs. He is a 15-time All-Star, and I think he's been 14 times. Um, so this season hasn't counted yet, this current season. And then, okay, so I think he's been on the All NBA first team. He's been on the second team once, and so I think he's been on the first team 13 times. If that, yeah, 13 times. So definitely like a mixed bag here. Jordan definitely has the best accolades, I would say, like in totality between Finals MVP and MVP. And yes, Kareem has the 19 All Stars, but that's a bit skewed because like it's just because of his longevity and people were voting him in because he was good and because they wanted him to play in the All Star game. Okay, but overall, in conclusion of this video, I think it's really hard to name a GOAT because, you know, as far as championships, you have one guy, but in the areas that you have one guy being good, they're bad or not bad, but less strong in another area. So, like, you might be good in championships, but not as strong in competition, but better in supporting cast, but worse in accolades, but better in longevity. So between those factors, and statistics too, so it's hard, and nobody is like the best in every single one. So for that reason, I don't think it's possible to name a unanimous MVP or excuse me, a unanimous GOAT of all time. So there's my take, guys. There is no GOAT. You can believe whoever you want to believe is the GOAT, but I think we're never gonna get it settled where everybody is like, yes, they're the GOAT. Jordan is the closest thing we got. I would bet you if you surveyed all of basketball fans all around, Jordan would probably get around 70% of the voting, with LeBron getting like 20, and then probably Kareem and Bill Russell each getting about like 5%. That would be my breakdown of it, but you know, it's subject to change on any given day, and I think it's a fun discussion to have, but one that we'll never really have a conclusion to. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave your comments and thoughts below. I'd love to hear from you, and I hope you guys have a good day. Bye.